There we go.
Okay, good.
Yeah, perfect.
Thank you.
Okay.
Right.
How's it going, guys? So yeah, this morning I had Bianca in. That was cool. That was an early start today, but we had to accommodate, so that one went well. Yeah, it was kind of an ideal example of the effects of long, slow duration type training. And I think she's probably the one that is the best example of that sort of training. That's pretty much most of the work that she's doing is long, slow duration. And her goal is, pretty much the longest there is. So yeah, she's definitely well suited for that. And I think the training's been complementing her skill set, quite a lot. So it was a really nice confirmation of fitness and making sure she's on the right track. So it was really cool to see.
So she had a big aerobic engine.
She has a very big aerobic engine. It was remarkable to see how quickly she recovered from the last effort. Like she went super deep, and all the numbers really showed that she went as hard as she could. But then within a matter of seconds, she just looked as fresh as, yeah, it was unbelievable. So if you can just go back and imagine like how you guys were after the last stage, just on the bars, just totally out of it for, at least a minute or two. She was like, in 30 seconds, she was just chatting and everything was like back to normal. Yeah, super impressive. Yeah. So what did you guys think about the reports you guys got?
You go first.
Oh, I thought it was amazing. I mean, I'm glad that I had watched some of those podcasts that I did, because it kind of gave me a little bit of the understanding, but then just hearing my own data and then comparing it against yours, it was like so interesting to see that despite the similarities in end results and performance, the journey to get there was so dramatically different. And then to hear my own personal physiology and how it it kind of matched what I saw on the road, but I was guessing before that, completely guessing, right? And ever since the session and ever since your analysis, I've completely changed my thinking about my own training, even on our own club races, my strategy, because now I know for my muscles, I have a very limited and set amount of bullets that I can really do as far as sprints before I run out of gas. Before that, I was just going hard all the time, which doesn't make any sense for me to do that if I want to be strategic. Yeah.
So Nate, say you rode with Bianca actually when she did the 24-hour ride.
Yeah, we both did for a while. Yeah.
And how did you guys feel? Like, how long did you guys go with her? And how did you felt at the end of your time riding with her?
Yeah, we kind of branched off a bit because, she said that she was going to set this pace and she was going to stick to it somewhere between 22 to 24 kilometers an hour. And for the rest of us, that at that time, it still felt so unnatural to be going that speed. So I guess we were kind of just doing our own loops and kind of just like meeting back up at later points. But once we got into like maybe the 10th hour, I remember with me and a few of the other guys who were left, we were just so gassed out that when we saw Bianca at her speed, we were just so thankful to catch up to her and then to start going at her pace. But she was totally fine. She looked like just fresh as ever.
Yeah.
For us, we were just, just struggling at that point. But yeah, no, it's a huge difference. And I think that what I got out of this, and I've been thinking about it more and more over the last week or so, but I think that what I thought my body could do before, like how we talked about over the 5-minute effort, over the 20-minute effort, I thought that was enough of a measure to see how my overall performance is. But now seeing the results from your assessment, I kind of now realize that it's about more of the repeatability of it. Even if I can force myself to go hard for 5 minutes, that's not, that doesn't really give the full picture of what my body should be able to do over a long effort, which is where it really matters, right? If you're doing a 100 to 200 kilometer race, you have to be able to gauge how many times you can do those same efforts. If we're riding for a short time, like we do like an hour or 2 hour rides, that may be able to get by, and you can squeeze those like short efforts in. But in the long term, or for like a longer ride, that really won't cut it. So I guess it also kind of makes me think, okay, well, what kind of rides am I training for too?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It's not just about, it's not really black or white. It's kind of like you have to decide, am I going to focus on these really short efforts, or do I want to focus on doing much longer types of training? So
yeah, it's definitely contextualized, needs to be contextualized. There's a lot of nuance, especially, with whatever it is you want to target. If you're looking for something a bit more explosive and short, let's look at a crit racer versus somebody who wants to do, a trip to Italy and they want to ride for a week and cover big distances with lots of climbing. At the end of the day, I think that a lot of us fall mostly into the category of wanting to kind of try many different things. And for most recreational athletes, giving them that possibility is really the primary goal. In order to do that, the emphasis really needs to be on essentially the size of the engine, the capacity of the engine. Because if you are really focusing on, speed, power, kind of performance more on the top end and really going hard, you're only gonna reap the benefits for very short duration explosive efforts. And that doesn't translate to what cycling is really about, which is the long distance stuff for most of us. So it's not one or the other. It's really more of a ratio between how much you do one thing and how much you do the other thing. And if you just, again, contextualize it, for most of us, riding for, anywhere from a 3 to 4 to 5 hour ride and feeling good to 8 to 15 hours a week to extrapolate that to a month to a full year, right? If you want to cover that distance and you want to be able to do it and improve while doing it, then you have to have all of that in mind when you're building the training program and when you're setting the training parameters. And that's why our test is really trying to give you, yes, the anaerobic threshold, but we put a lot of emphasis on trying to really find that zone 1 or zone 2. It's probably going to be a lot of zone 1 and zone 2 used here, but just for everybody else's sake, in Dark Labs, we use a 3-zone model. We just use the oxygenation zone or the aerobic zone, then the tempo sweet spot, and then everything above your anaerobic threshold or the non-sustainable domain. Most other platforms or coaches or methods will use a 5 or 6 zone model, and that's why you use zone 1 and 2 is the equivalent of our zone 1. Zone 3 is a tempo sweet spot, and zone 4 is kind of the threshold, the anaerobic threshold, above which things become non-sustainable. So when you hear me talk about zone 1, 2, and 3, that's what I'm referring to: zone 1, 2, zone 3, and then zone 4 and above. Okay. So really, for the majority of the type of training that we want to do, we want to spend as much time as possible around that zone 1. Now, a lot of people have a problem accepting that because it's very easy. It's very, very easy. Mm-hmm. And it's very hard. We come from a mentality of no pain, no gain. And, you got like an hour to go. You're not just going to cruise around. You don't want to do that. You want to just go as hard as you can, break a sweat, and feel like you got something in today. Which again has its importance, but it's a matter of how much do you actually need to do that in order to get the benefit versus how much is too much. So zone 1 is actually something that really allows our body to do what it's built to do best, which is to go the distance. And physiologically speaking, it's time where the body can really, it's still working. I mean, metabolically, it is very active, but it still has plenty of ability to utilize fat as its primary fuel source, right? So breaking down fat versus breaking down carbs requires a lot of energy investment. And therefore you need to be able to go at a pace that allows your body to use enough energy to move you, but still have plenty of energy left to break down the fats to keep you going. So if you go too hard, you're going to start to really mix the fuel source and lean more on carbs rather than fats. Mm-hmm. Now, it's not just about, burning fat and losing weight and stuff like that. It's more about what type of fuel you're putting into the system and really adapting the system to rely on fat more than on carbs, simply because fats are a fuel source that is way more, we have it in a much greater abundance than carbs, and it provides a lot more energy per unit of energy versus carbs. So it's kind of like thinking about the diesel versus nitrous, and so that's really how we should start thinking about that. So when you do zone 1 training, what happens is you are developing a system that is better suited to utilize that fat as a fuel source, and it does that by improving many things. We're not going to go too far into the weeds as far as the mechanisms that are involved in the process, but really it's a matter of being able to bring more oxygen into the body, using it to break down the fat and use it for energy so that we can ride longer. And over time, you will also be able to ride faster in that fat burning zone. So in a case like Bianca, who is really building towards being able to cover a massive distance to ride across Canada within a certain time, it will be worse, simply because if she relies on carbs, it's not going to last very long. So to take that example and shift it towards people like yourselves and other people in your group, we're basically using the same exact model, but just tailoring it to someone who isn't planning to ride across Canada and still wants to go and have fun. So the way to do that is really to still keep zone 1 as the primary zone you're going to train in, but then trickle in structured workouts where you get to push the envelope and really stretch things out. So you have like high intensity workouts still spread out around throughout the week, maybe a crit, maybe a fast group ride, but you try to isolate it from the zone 1, and that is also referred to as periodized training. Okay, so you have a time where you save for zone 1 specific training, where you just go steady for as long as you want to or as long as you can, and then on specific days you go really deep, and you try to work through the other end of the scale, which is your zone 3 or the non-sustainable severe domain. So that's kind of somewhat short explanation of the idea behind zone 1, what are the benefits, and kind of leeway into how you would structure it into a training program for anybody.
It's really interesting because it sounds like you're kind of just working zone 1 and zone 3. Is that the definition of pure periodization?
That's the definition of polarized training. So polarized training, when I periodize my training, I basically systematically spread the training in a way that I can complement each training zones individually. But the polarized method is really working on either zone 1 or zone 3. Now, with regards to polarized versus what we refer to as pyramidal type training, which basically incorporates zone 1, zone 2, and zone 3, there is still some controversy regarding which one is best. But to me, that's where context really comes in, because even though a lot of people would say, well, if I choose to do the polarized method, then I don't touch tempo sweet spot because that's just garbage miles, right? Or the garbage zone. And you hear that probably more since zone 1 is becoming more popularized, and a lot of people are like trying to avoid riding at zone 2 or at tempo and sweet spot. But to me, those still have great value. And so much so that if you look at training data from top level athletes, whether it's runners or cyclists, they spend a huge amount of time at zone 2 simply because that's the nature of their sport. So if you go and you climb, okay, let's say you go and you do Cypress, you're not going to ride it at zone 1 just because of the nature of the terrain. You know, it's just a really big climb, and if you go at zone 1, you're not going to make it to the top anytime soon. But if you go at zone 3, you're not going to make it, you know, past the first part of the climb. So you get kind of stuck in the middle, and that's absolutely fine. So to avoid zone 2 altogether, in my opinion, is really not what you want to do. So that's where it's really important to understand what the goals of the person, what the goals are. And an example of someone who might benefit from polarized training would be someone who's focused more on, you know, explosiveness, because for them, being able to develop an aerobic engine would be beneficial because they just want to get to the end of the race. So if they have a slightly better aerobic capacity, it will give them, they'll become more efficient at burning fuel, which right off the bat, they're not very good at. Simply because of their muscle typology, and you know, they're just genetically not built for burning fat. They're just muscular and very explosive, so they're not very good at that. So maybe by working on that as a limiter and trying to improve it, they'll be able to get a few more kilometers before they get to the finish line, just to make it over there. But then on the other end, when it's go time and they do sprint workouts, they blow the doors off everybody else, right? They go as hard as they can. They leave nothing on the table and just go flat out. So if you get them to do a lot of zone 2 kind of tempo sweet spot work, you're gonna basically clamp them in a zone where they're not very good. You know, they're required to use, they're basically gonna redline very soon. Their tempo is not a very wide domain. So they either burn a lot or they don't burn enough. So they're kind of stuck in this no man's land. But if you have someone who's a diesel engine, who likes to ride long, loves to climb, isn't very punchy, or loves to sit on the front of the pack and just drill all day, that would be someone that would very likely benefit from zone 2 training. So they would go and they'll climb, you know, triple crowns and stuff like that. They'll just climb and climb and climb. And inevitably they'll be in zone 2 or in tempo. And my job as a coach is to basically make them better at that. So obviously, just by nature of their style of riding and their goal, they'll spend more time at zone 2, and that's absolutely fine.
So if I can ask too, is part of this kind of training, like you're talking about like the differences between training for Zack versus training for me, for example, but is it also important to try to expand like your zone 1 as well, so that, you know, if you're someone like Zack who doesn't want to tip too far into that zone 2, but if he does more zone 1 training, can he expand that out so he can actually be still in zone 1, while at a higher wattage at a certain point?
Yeah, so the beauty of zone one is the beauty of really what we know from the polarized method is, if you spend a lot of time in zone one, plus doing some high intensity kind of sprinkled in from time to time, you will very likely see growth and how much power you can produce at zone one. It's just the nature, it's just the way we work. So, if you're able to ride 10 hours a week and you do, let's say 8 of those at zone one, over time, you'll just get fitter and fitter and fitter, and you're going to get stronger and stronger and stronger. And again, it's like everything else, you just want to push it slightly, every time you want to get a bit of a stimulus going. So it's just like going to the gym. Every time you'll go, you're just, add a few more pounds and a few more pounds, a few more pounds, obviously, maybe not week to week, but over time. But maybe you keep the reps the same or the sensation the same. So you just kind of add the load. Now, obviously, that actually goes back to what I said before, but our desire to improve quickly with this no pain, no gain mentality. Zone one takes a bit more time to develop, right? So it takes patience to see big gains, significant gains in zone one. Maybe shorter than what people would expect, but it's still, we're talking weeks to months. Whereas explosive power or peak power output can improve very quickly, very, very quickly. So I have cases, I usually like to start with individuals with a training program that includes sprint interval training sessions twice a week. No matter who they are, no matter what they do, I just like to do that to set a baseline. So everything else is still zone one, but those specific workouts have like 7 30-second sprints, and they're all out, full gas, no pacing, no nothing, with plenty of time to recover. So it's not like they're set on a fixed recovery between the sprints. Basically, the instruction is to go as hard as you can, recover for as long as you need to, so that you're fresh for the next one. And what I expect to see is basically they hit, probably by the 4th session, they do 2 weeks of that. So 4 sessions overall. By the 4th session, you can see them pretty consistently hitting really high numbers, and the heart rate tends to kind of drift up a little bit. So you see a bit of cardiac drift, but you do see them kind of hitting those peaks quite consistently. And they report that, wow, like I feel much better doing these. So there's a lot that goes on to peak power production and just being able to go harder. It's not just your ability to metabolically make changes. It's also your muscular adaptations. It's your really ability to suffer. And that's a whole different aspect. If you want to train someone, you have to think about not only how do I improve them aerobically, but also mentally. You want them to become just more used to that load. When you go and you pick something up, if you carry a big weight, even if you can do it over time, you're just going to approach it in a different way because you know what it's going to feel like, and you just kind of prepare yourself in a different way and you jack it up. So same thing with these types of training. You just go at it with a different mindset, and you know what to do. But underneath the surface, things are just improving at a much more rapid rate than compared to zone one.
In one session, in one training session, can you do both? Or, if I started out in a zone one training session within my zones, now that I know, and I'll come to Dark Horse Labs and I've defined it, if in that hour session I dipped into zone 3, does that ruin my ability to go back into zone 1 because I'm turning on a different engine, my anaerobic engine?
Fantastic question. So in a recent podcast with Peter Attia interviewing Dr. Inigo San Milan, actually both doctors, sorry, they discussed this exact point. And according to Inigo San Milan, who's really kind of, he's a big, very knowledgeable professor in this field in zone 2 training. he looks at that from the perspective of lactate accumulation. So we look at it from the muscle oxygenation perspective. He looks at it from the lactate production perspective, but they are somewhat looking at the same thing. And his recommendation is, oh, and by the way, he's also the coach of Tadej Pogačar, the guy who won the Tour de France, this random guy. So from his experience and his understanding of the mechanisms, when you want to combine the two, it's definitely possible. You can definitely do that. But the way to do it is to not ruin the zone one by introducing any high intensity in earlier parts of the ride, because it's basically you're creating a debt that you can't cover while you're riding. That's just not a possibility unless you go really easy or you maybe stop and take a break. But we're talking about like really coming to very, very low pace, something that most people just won't do. And if you want to really throw it in, you throw it in at the end. So you go out for a 4-hour ride and you have some, I don't know, you ride with a group of guys and you guys just want to, hammer, then keep it to the last hour, right? Don't do it in the first 3. Yeah, so that's a really interesting point. And yeah, the reason for it is because, you just put a tax on your body in the first hour, and then you just can't get rid of that metabolic activity. You can reduce it. And so you're kind of stuck with it. And then zone one isn't zone one anymore.
It's like, I think for most people, and especially for the Last Drop Club members, it's so easy to go into the higher zones, zone 2, especially zone 3, because it's like you do a sprint, everyone goes, or you hit some kind of segment, but that then impacts your ability to go back down to train zone 1.
Yeah, so much so that, my recommendation to most people is, the warm-up is pretty much the most crucial part of your ride. A lot of times we don't know how to look at a warm-up and how to use it to our benefit. But even when you just start riding, we are going to cause a metabolic change that is very large by order of magnitude. So you got, if you're at 60 beats per minute just sitting down and resting and maybe getting organized, you're going up to 90. The moment you start riding and you want, the ceiling of your zone 1 is about, let's say, in your guys' case, an average of 140 beats per minute. So it's still almost double. And so if you don't kind of approach it with a bit of a warm up and just gradually pick yourself up there, it's going to be a doubling effect of your metabolic cost, not exactly, but a really big cost right from the get-go. And even that shift, even though we're still under zone 1, metabolically it causes a huge disturbance in the system. So the warm-up should not be taken lightly. So if somebody's rushing to a ride and it's a zone 1 ride, it's much better for them to just take it easy and ride easy to that ride and then enjoy the full benefit of that. Because those first 10, 20 minutes that they ride and just rush to get there and everything's jacked up just because they did that, that ride is now they'll be in a debt for the rest of that ride. Which is really interesting because naturally outside, you'll do that for sure. I do that all the time. Right? Yeah. You want to hit a small little incline, you just go hard, and then all of a sudden, boom, you've spoiled it. On Zwift, their warm up is always really hard. And so to me, I'm like, it's not a warm up; it's a full-on race at the start. They're always like leg warmers, hip openers, and you're like, and they're hard. And so then it really impacts the zone 1, 2 training. I guess a recommendation for group rides in that case is really to take the first few minutes for everybody to just kind of check in, make sure everybody's kind of good, talk about the week, talk about whatever, and use that time to get everybody up to speed, or get everybody just relaxed, from wherever it is they came from. When sharing the knowledge, so we did SFU hill repeats last weekend, and the only people who were disciplined in the protocol, which was to, at least for us, to build kind of zone 1, zone 2, was to stay within, for me, it was a heart rate.
And for Nate, you had the power meter, so
Yeah.
you were.
I was
you were
looking at
pacing
power.
us. Everyone else was gone.
Yeah.
And in a club ride, we're like, well, do we be disciplined and stay within our zone?
Yeah.
Or do we try and keep up with the rest of the group who, you know, now there's a big gap and we feel slow.
But people don't know yet, right? It's just that we've been woke.
Yeah.
that we see the benefit now. But I think that, you know, that kind of discipline, like I finished that ride and I didn't think that doing SFU 4 times and climbing 1,000 meters would feel that okay. But when I finished it, I was like, this is fine. Like I don't feel like I'm dying at the end. And I feel like that kind of repeatability becomes like the next goal, like being able to climb. Because like if you're on an actual race, not on an actual ride, you're gonna hit those inclines, those long steady inclines again and again, and you should be able to do it more than once. But at our current style of like riding, I think we go way too hard, way too soon for so many of our rides. And like even thinking back to like just coming to the group ride, if I'm 5 minutes behind, I'm like pushing 400 watts to go up Cambie to get to the meetup spot, and it's done, right? Like if I get there, I've already ruined all the benefits I can get from that ride. So I think, you know, it's a lot of education that is needed.
Yeah, I think it's also important, you know, we still want to enjoy ourselves and not be too strict on ourselves with regards to, you know, am I at zone 1 or am I not? At the end of the day, you want to be able to do this, enjoy it, and keep it as part of your life and not something that your life is now kind of, you know, targeted for. So that's really important no matter what training you're doing. I think that, you know, I have guys who are racing full time and they do their zone 1 still. The majority of the time their training is zone 1, but look, they're racing on the weekends. I mean, obviously when they're racing, there's no room for zones or anything. I don't want them to even look at their units, you know, their head units. So
that's perfect though, isn't it? They've got zone 1 training throughout the week, and then they hit a race end of the week, which is going to be naturally their zone 3.
Yeah, exactly. So for you guys, you know, the weekend rides can definitely be at different times of the year. They can serve the goal of zone 1 because it's such a great time to be able to ride more. And if you want to do zone 1 at that time of the year to build the base, that's great. But if you guys want to start to kind of, you know, go a little bit harder, that's perfect. So, you know, it's just a matter of timing it. So in the beginning of the season, maybe you want to do more zone 1. And then as you go along the season, you want to try to go a little bit deeper and then maybe race and, you know, challenge yourself more. I mean, at the end of the day, we want to become stronger for specific things. And the things we want to be targeting are maybe the group rides for some people, maybe races for others, you know, or other big challenges. So definitely the group rides can still be very challenging and don't have to be restricted to specific training zones. They're somewhat, you know, mini race simulations. That's what they are. And you know, it's really interesting. I mean, look, in my opinion, if you want to design a training program, and I can probably give you guys a few kind of tips on how I would do it. You kind of want to start from really what the person wants to get and then kind of work backwards from that. So if you know that the person just wants to ride faster with their buddies, then I would not restrict them from going hard on the weekends. You know, if they want to go full gas, go ahead and do it. But then I'll have to account for that fatigue, maybe in the following days, to just make sure they're recovering well from it and they can still get the benefits from the ride, plus the zone 1 rides that will be coming after, or any other ride that will come after. Whatever you do in any training program, in my opinion, when you have a coach, their first question must be not how much you can train, but how much time you have to recover. Okay. The game in adaptations comes from proper recovery, not from how much training you're doing. The workload is very important, but this is really more about the specifics of how I'll get to where I want to be. But to actually get there, you need to be able to recover. And if you can't do that, you're not going to make it. That's it. So what I'm saying is you can select different types of training. You can download a training program or, work with a coach and pay. But if they're not focusing on your recovery, it's not going to work. So yes, zone 1 is important. Yes, going hard at specific times is important, but you need to be able to recover from those things. Okay. As far as I guess in your guys' case, using zone 1 as kind of a social group ride type activity, that's fantastic. You can definitely use that. And even if you go on a hard group ride, you're probably going to you can spend the first hour of it, until you get to the mountains. It's kind of a social aspect, and then just kind of break loose and let everybody run their course. The funny thing is that a lot of times when people do have the tendency to go hard, they don't do a lot of zone 1 training, what ends up happening is they do get stuck in the middle. And in order to entice people to train at zone 1, what I always say is, look, if you get stuck in the middle, then you're probably not going hard enough, right? So if you start to do zone 1 and maybe adopt somewhat of a polarized method, then when it's time to go hard, you really need to go hard. And some people really get connected with that. They're like, okay, great. So I'll still get my benefit. I'll still get my chance to go deep, but I'll have to earn it. I can't just go full gas anytime I get on the bike, right? I'll have to earn it. And then when I go hard, I go so hard that, I'm at risk of losing my breakfast.
That's
right?
me. That's like literally.
That's fine. Yeah, that's good. Yeah. But that's the way to do it. So, if you look at even people in the pro ranks, they go 90%, even more of the time at zone 1. You can really ride with them at that pace. You'll be surprised how slow they go. But when it's go time, forget about it. There's no way to hold their pace.
So I had a question for zone 1 training then. If you wanted to build your aerobic engine, because this is where I really want to focus on, and you alluded to this earlier. Now that I know my zone, which you listed out as 144 beats per minute, approximately 201 watts, do I try and do that for a longer duration, like to continue to push the duration while keeping within my heart rate and power? Or do I try and increase my power while maintaining my heart rate? Like, what do I hold constant while trying to push further?
Yeah. Okay. This is another great question. So should I go with heart rate? Should I go with power? Which one would serve me better? So if you look through the report that we give you, zone 1 is set by heart rate. It is set by power as well, but we recommend using the heart rate. So when you go and you do zone 1, there is fatigue involved because you're going to ride for a very long period of time. Maybe you start in the morning, it's cold. You go later in the day, it's hot. Things change quite a bit. And heart rate is a really good representation of what's happening internally. It's probably the only measurement that we have that looks internally and tells us what's going on, except for sensation. Power is an external metric and it's objective, right? It's objective. So you have 300 watts is the same for me, for you, for everybody, right? But even for myself, if I'm set at 200 watts and 140 beats per minute, that was taken when I was fresh. So you came to the lab, you came to the studio, we tested it, you were fresh, that's what we got. But after 5 hours, those 200 watts will not be equal to 140 beats per minute. They may be equal to 150 beats per minute, right? So in order for me to stay at zone 1, I'll have to drop my power down quite a bit to stay there. That's why power is not ideal to use for those types of rides. And yes, volume or zone 1 is really based on the concept of doing more, right? Not going harder, but going longer. And over time, what will happen is you'll see that you're kind of better able to sustain higher power output simply because you are developing that physiological mechanism. You're able to deliver more oxygen to your working muscles over time. And then all of a sudden, the power you can hold over that ride, let's say 4 hours or 5 hours, goes up. But you have to be able to hold your internal load somewhat the same. And so you have to fuel properly. You have to drink quite a bit. You have to not go over too high and, creating that debt. That does require discipline. Yeah, so that, to answer your question, that really is the way to do it. Now, when you want to go harder, the problem with heart rate, again, is that let's say you have a 1 hour session and you want to go and do over-unders, or you want to do over-unders is a great example. Tabata type training. You can't do it with heart rate. Heart rate can't respond quickly enough to show you those changes. So you have to use something else, and power is ideal for that because power responds instantly. So if you want to hit certain targets and certain goals, certain power targets, and that are above your zone 1, you revert to power because it will change as quickly as you need it to, where heart rate will just have a lag in its response. You can't really rely on it during those types of sessions. That's how you use power, and that's how you use heart rate when you train.
So what would be your recommendation for my training compared to Zach's?
Well, again, so if the goal is to, let's say, focus on each of your attributes and not necessarily get you both to do a specific goal. So if Zach is really built more like a sprinter and he says, I want to win crits, and you say, I'm built more like a diesel engine and I want to do haute route, or I don't know, Transalp or whatever, then, in essence, what you will see is both of you guys will still build up that zone 1, because as cyclists, we just have to have it, right? But maybe Zach won't do 4 hours. What's the point of doing 4 hours if his race is less than 30 minutes, right? So Zach, your training will very likely look like maybe split days where you have shorter intervals, but you have maybe a morning session that's lighter, and then an evening session that is specific on hitting specific targets, very short, high intensity efforts. And then as you get closer to the crits, you may want to convert that to more race-like simulations. So that will very likely include some zone 2 training as well, but you'll be maybe in a group and you'll do, pace lines, or you'll be sitting on them and just, trying to punch and jump through and do sprints from a higher speed. So I'm really trying to kind of do more specificity type work where you're simulating the goal that you're trying to get to. And that probably comes within like a 6-week range from where it is you want to be. And then for you, Nate, if the goal is really more long distance endurance type training, probably you won't see too much threshold work really, because to cover long distances, you don't want to ride at your threshold that much. You want to be able to ride under that, and definitely zone 1 will apply to you in much bigger volumes. So you may think about a training camp to go down to a sunny place and do 20 plus hours a week. Pretty chill, but just cover those massive distances every day, right? Be able to even ride close to 200 kilometers a day without getting tired, and really dialing in your recovery from day in, day out, because you not only do you need to be able to cover a certain distance, you need to recover from that and do it again repeatedly. So in both cases, recovery would be really important, but one is basically recovering from depleting their system from riding such a long distance, whereas the other one is really trying to just prevent muscle damage and muscle tissue, muscle tears from the explosive high intensity efforts. So very different mechanisms that we're dealing with, and as a result, different things we have to take into account. But that's kind of how I would structure it.
Just from a physiological standpoint, is it going to be a lot easier for me to train my body for those longer rides than it is for me to train for crits, for example? Because I just did my first crit and it was really difficult for me to just repeat those sprints again and again, and I ended up getting dropped after 5 laps. So is it sort of more the like the low hanging fruit and the path of least resistance for me to just do what I'm more naturally, I guess, built for.
Yeah, that is. But if you tell me, you know, I want to improve in what I'm good at, but I still want to do well at the crits, then that's very much possible. So that does require just shifting the focus in the type of training you'll do, and you'll do probably stuff that's more similar to Zach, right? But still, because that's not your forte, you shouldn't expect to win them from sprints, right? So if you want to improve the type of training, you want to improve your crit ability, the type of training you will do now becomes more threshold type work, really being able to do the big launches, long range attacks, somewhat sprinting ability, because you know you still have to do the sprints out of the corners and stuff like that. But you will still have a different race strategy in mind when you go to those crits versus Zach, because you just can't function in the same way. With that, we haven't even touched upon something else, which is nutrition.
Those are my 3 questions. Yeah.
Yeah. So nutrition is massive, because all we talk about right now is energy expenditure, basically. How do I train? How do I keep my zone 1? What is it good for? Heart rate versus power, stuff like that. But these are all things that basically reduce the amount of energy that we have, or sorry, they basically talk about energy expenditure. We haven't talked about kind of caloric intake and what do we do in order to complement our phenotypes and extract more from our performance. Okay. So a lot of times what I see is people do zone 1 training. We can call it even, you know, light intensity, light to moderate intensity, but they eat basically race fuel. So gels and bars and lots of kind of fast burning or quick, very digestible type foods. And when you think about it, when you're going that slow, you can pretty much eat whatever you want. You can eat a burger on the bike. It's not gonna be difficult, because you're just going at a pretty slow speed. Maybe a burger is not ideal, but you know, just more complex carbs, more fats. Drink water. You don't need to drink mix at that point. You know, just kind of get your body to work a little bit harder to access fat rather than glucose, right? So that's another thing. Like it's really important to think about that, because you definitely want to impose. You can impose a greater challenge on your body during those zone 1 rides if you consume things that are harder to digest, and that's fine. That's the time to do it. That way you'll get the adaptations that you want, and it will probably come faster rather than just consuming gels all the time and slowing the adaptation process. Now, there's also a pre and post aspect to the ride. So when you finish an aerobic ride, realistically, if you finish the ride, you want to finish it without feeling hungry at all. Like just eat solid foods, eat stuff that you like. And it can be savory, it can be sweet, doesn't matter. But and you'll do yourself a lot of good if you eat something that actually is more moist, because your gut will just absorb it much better than if you just eat dry stuff and just have to kind of fill it up with water. But that's just a small tip. But at the end of the day, you want to finish that ride and just feel, you know, not that hungry, and I can keep going. Like I can finish 4 hours, and I can probably do 2 hours more at this pace, no problem. That's what you want to feel like at the end of a light to moderate ride. Then if you go and do high intensity or before a race, carb loading is a real thing. So, but we don't need that many carbs to refuel or to replenish our glycogen storages. It actually takes a relatively short amount of time. We're talking about 48 hours to maybe 72 hours on the far end. But a couple of days before a big ride, you could probably start to consume more carbs, and that should be sufficient to replenish the system and get you ready for whatever it is you want to do. So you don't have to just have it around all the time. But the way I do it is you want to impose what is, you'll hear more of this term, it's called metabolic flexibility. So you want to eat the things that will serve you for the specific purpose you want them to serve you. So if you want to do zone 1, you don't need to have a big breakfast with tons of carbs in it, because you can eat whatever you want, hop on the bike and just kind of, keep going. But for high intensity rides, having that sugar or something that is slightly more rich in simple carbohydrates and maybe complex carbohydrates as well, will be better before a high intensity effort.
So really by you're fueling based off of the work to come. Are there differences in nutrition tips by phenotype? So like diesel versus race car?
It's probably more related to that. I don't know, but my theory would probably be how much, right? So for you, Zach, if you go and you ride with Nate, just because of what we saw with how much your muscles were working, I would assume that you'll probably need to consume more calories than Nate.
That's what happens. I eat easily triple the content that he does to do the same ride.
Yeah, so you're basically carrying a lot more metabolically active tissues, right? So muscle is a very metabolically active tissue, and the type of muscle that you have is probably more leaning on the fast twitch type 2 fiber versus Nate's type 1, more endurance, slow twitch fibers. And so just to keep those going, you're gonna have to consume more calories. So that's just the nature of it. But what type of calories, again, kind of depends on what ride you guys are doing.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. So I guess, in a nutshell, I think the focus for most people would be to maybe not focus too much on the numbers. I think that zone 1 should be quite intuitive. I mean, if you go and it feels like you can enjoy the scenery, you can hold a conversation. That's it. Like that is the zone you can ride in for a very, very long time. Zone 2 or tempo sweet spot is a zone that you can sustain for a very long period of time, like climbing Cypress or climbing Seymour, or climbing both at the same day. But you have to pay more attention to caloric intake because you're going to burn through carbs to a much higher degree. But just sensation wise, again, it's a pace you can hold up climbs like that. So just get yourself familiar with what that is. If that's your goal, just start climbing more. Zone 3 is an interesting one, but I think it is probably useful to have some sort of a metric to help you know where you're there, unless you want to stick to polarized methods, in which case you don't care. You just go as hard as you can, right? So in my opinion, keeping it simple and sticking with your own sensations is the ideal situation. But if you're new to this game, that's where I would recommend to come into a lab and get your zones tested, just to get you off on a good start. So you'll know roughly where you're at. And then your job will become to become familiar with what each training zone that was prescribed to you actually feels like. And at some point, you're going to be able to just kind of remove yourself from those numbers and really have a good sensation of what your body's telling you. And that would be the ideal situation, in my opinion.
Yeah. So we have about 5-10 minutes left just before I have to head out here. Is there any kind of takeaways that you'd like to kind of share with some of the new riders who are kind of on the fence, kind of thinking about coming to do a dark horse assessment?
Well, pretty much what I just mentioned. Yeah. I think that more information does not equal better results. Okay, I think that a lot of times we get bombarded with data and we don't really know what to do with it. What's more valuable is insights that will lead us to better behavioral changes. And so coming to Dark Labs is essentially an experience that in my hope will provide you with more insight and not so much bombard you with data. Okay, that's the point of this experience. So when people come in and I get to meet them and we get to talk and we get to understand who they are, what they're doing, what their background is, what their goals are, then I will start to go down the process of looking at their data, extracting everything I can and I know from my experience, and providing it back to them with insight and simple tools they can start to do right now to have better positive behavioral changes. And that's basically the experience that I had with you guys, hopefully.
Yeah. I would just say, to summarize my own perspective, is really 3 takeaways. The first one is just knowing who I am better than just my own subjective thought. Yeah. And that has then given me the second point, which is my strategy on rides. Now I know what my strengths and weaknesses are, what I can leverage and what to watch out for. So yeah, I got the sprint in the back pocket, but I got to watch out for energy expenditure. And then the last thing, the third thing, is really my homework. Like, now I know what to work on if I want to get better in my rides. Before, I had no idea. I was like, make my zone 2 better. But really, it's work on zone 1 and then hone in on my strength, which is potentially my zone 3 area.
Yeah. I think for me, everything that Zach said, plus also just taking out the guesswork, and also like the expectation that you kind of hold yourself to against others. I feel like that's a really big thing that kind of can change your mentality about cycling, when you feel like you aren't performing at the level everyone else is, but you're you're maybe going about it in the wrong way, right? So I think just knowing your strengths and just knowing where you can fit into the group and what your ultimate goals are, I think that really helps you define what kind of rider that you want to be. So no, it's been a really eye-opening experience, and thank you so much for giving that to us, and hopefully we can spread the word.
It's been enlightening.
Yeah, really very enlightening. Yeah.
Very happy to hear. Very happy to hear.
So we're just gonna close this out here, Assaf, so probably can stop the recording here at this point. So I think we just want